as I started to discuss there a moment ago, we're going to go ahead and get started on pure competition. Notice how I have this, and it's both the short and the long run. So it's really both chapters today that we'll be doing, both of them that you talked about, oh, Jesus, or that you read for today's class. I need to set up the show correctly. There we go. Now we're good. So we have 4 market structures. Okay, pure competition is the first that we're going to do today. Next week will be monopoly, and the week after that will be the remaining 2. And the way to think about these particular types of items is that what we're doing, let me see if I can get if we want to think about a spectrum here, okay, there is no such thing as pure, okay? And so, I mean, here I've called it pure competition, but there's nothing that fits exactly in to any one of these 4. Some books call it perfect competition, what have you. But if you want to think about it as ways of a spectrum. So today we're going to talk about pure competition. So we're going to be over here. I'm just putting it on the right for ease. Okay. And next week when we talk about monopoly, we're going to put that over there. And then the week after, we're going to fill this in, okay, with oligopoly that's over here, and monopolistic competition that's someplace in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about these 4 market structures over the next 3 weeks. And the way to think about it is on a spectrum. There's no such thing as any one on any that fits perfectly into any of these. But a number of things come close. So when we talk about this too, we're not talking about a firm, okay? And a firm is a group of firms that produce a similar product or what's in an industry. So what we're looking at is industries, okay? We're not looking at the firm, okay? So we don't really care if it's a sole proprietorship, a partnership, or a corporation. We don't really care so much what they produce. It's how the industry is set up. So when we talk about things, we could talk about perhaps the auto industry, okay, which would have GM, it'd have Ford, it'd have Toyota, what have you. And those would be different firms. And then within each of those firms, they'd have a number of plants, okay? So if we were talking about the auto industry, excuse me here, we could talk about Ford, GM, Chrysler, Toyota, what have you. If we're talking about cell phone companies, perhaps we're talking Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and maybe some of those other smaller ones along there. So it's a group of firms. An industry is a group of firms, and that's what we're going to be looking at, industries. Now, perfect or pure competition has basically, and when I compare these, next week when I put up monopoly and the week after that when we're talking oligopoly and monopolistic competition, I'm going to come back to each of these characteristics. The characteristic of perfect competition, and when we think of perfect competition, the thing to think about is farming. Okay, think about farms. And the idea behind farms is there are a large number of independent sellers. Okay, you start driving, especially through Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, whatever. There's a large number of farmers. They're all independent. They get to make their own production decision. And depending upon the quality of their soil, the tools they have, their expertise, they can also choose what to plant. Okay. And in fact, it's this time of year or perhaps even a little earlier where they're making those decisions. And we'll talk about how that decision is made here in a couple of minutes. Okay. They have a standardized product. Okay. And what that means is, and the way to think about this is think in terms of corn. Okay. Corn is corn is corn. Okay. Your corn and my corn are totally the same. Okay. And so there's no differentiation. We can't tell the difference between the corn grown on my farm and the corn grown on your farm. So they compete on the basis of price. They are pure price competitors, okay? Because there is no difference. Now, a quick note here. Farmers, and you're going to see this as we go on, pure competition means excess profits get competed away. And because of that, nobody wants to be in pure competition. Nobody wants to be in perfect competition. So what they have, okay, back in my youth, there was only yellow corn, okay? And then they started to come up with the hybrids, the white corn, and now you have bicolored corn. Why did they do all that? To try to get away from perfect competition, because they know in perfect competition, they're competing on the basis of price. There's no differentiation. But if I can say, yeah, they've got the yellow corn, but mine's the bicolored corn, and so it's sweeter and it tastes better, what have you. And for that, you're going to spend an extra couple of cents per ear, but it's well worth it because it tastes better. You know, maybe it cooks up better, maybe it works in the cornbread better, whatever those reasons might be. That's what those farmers try to do. Okay. In fact, a story from my youth, my dad grew up on a farm. But in fact, that farm today is under O'Hare Airport, which is in Chicago. And his dad told him, get out of farming. Okay. And the reason his dad told him, get out of farming, is because when you see what we're going to be talking about today with this perfect competition or pure competition, and there's no differentiation and you're competing just on the basis of price, it's a tough business, folks. So what that means is that the firm is a price taker. They have no control over their price. The price is set by the market. So when you walk into the Gap, or when you walk into Eddie Bauer, or when you go on Amazon, they have a control over the price. They can tell you, hey, we're charging $30 or $100 or whatever it is for this pair of jeans, this shirt, whatever else. And if you don't like it, tough luck. Go find someplace else, okay? Or buy somebody else's shirts or shorts or pants or whatever it might be, okay? But under pure competition, they have no control over price. They can't do what Amazon and the Gap and Eddie Bauer and Land's End does, okay? That price is set by the market, okay? And I could pull up a website of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and you can find exactly what the price of a bushel of corn is selling for, you know, on the futures markets, what have you today. It's set on the market. And the farmer that tries to say, hey, my corn is $3 a bushel, what's going to happen is if I'm the buyer, I'm going to say, everybody else is selling theirs for $2.90. You're at $2.90. That's what I'll pay you. And if you don't like it, fine. I'm not going to buy your corn. I'll go elsewhere. And finally, they have what we call free entry and exit. It's easy to become a farmer, relatively speaking. Not cheap, mind you, but it's relatively easy. If you want to be a farmer, you can pretty much go into business, buy yourself some land and, you know, a combine or what have you, and enter. And when you lose money, you're free to sell your farm to the next person and move on. Okay. So there's free entry and exit. And those are the four characteristics that we're going to be talking about when we talk about all of these different industry structures. Now, back in chapter 3, we saw that the demand curve was downward sloping, and that where the supply and the demand crossed was market equilibrium. Okay. And that gave us the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. But the problem for the individual farmer, the firm, and the way to think about the firm in this case is the farmer, is that their demand curve looks totally different. The market demand curve is over here on the left. The firm's demand curve is on the right. And notice what happens to the firm's demand curve. The firm's demand curve is what we call perfectly horizontal. If you want to use technical terms from earlier in the semester, it is perfectly elastic at the market price. So whatever that market price is, the demand for that farmer's product is perfectly horizontal at that price. What that means is that if the farmer, let's suppose the farmer has a farm that's 1,000 acres. Okay. And if he chooses to plant this many acres, 10 acres, or 100 acres, or all 1,000 acres, nobody really cares, because the price he's going to get is determined by the market. Because even though, you know, as a farmer, you may choose to plant anywhere from 1 to 1,000 acres on your 1,000-acre land, in the grand scheme of things, there are millions of acres being planted here in the US. Okay, you can then count around the world where there's millions of acres of corn being planted. All of a sudden, frankly, the market doesn't care. You want to plant 1,000-year acres? Go ahead. You want to plant 10? Go ahead. You're so small in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So the firm's demand curve is perfectly horizontal. Now, what this leads to is some unique items, okay? Total revenue, recall, is price times quantity. We looked at that back in chapter 3, okay? So if you produce none, the quantity you sell is 0, your total revenue is 0, and your marginal revenue is 0. But if you sell 1 unit, okay, if you go ahead and sell 1 unit, the total revenue is 131 and the marginal revenue is 131. But if you choose to sell 2 units, your total revenue goes up to 262, 131 times 2. But your marginal revenue, and keep in mind, marginal is always the difference. Okay. Last week we talked marginal cost. Okay. This week we're talking marginal revenue. The difference in revenue is 131 bucks. And when we add yet a third production, yes, your total revenue went up, but your marginal revenue is still 131 bucks. The difference between 393 and 262 is still 131. So what happens is this is a beautiful world. I can sell all I want. In fact, I could go 4, 5, 600,000, what have you, and my marginal revenue would always be 131 bucks. It would always be 131 bucks. So isn't this a beautiful world? No matter how much the farmer produces. You see, when we were back in chapter 3, and we had that downward sloping demand curve, remember we put price up here, we put quantity down here. The only way to sell more, was to cut the price. Notice the farmer doesn't have to do that. The farmer can sell all he produces at 131 bucks. Okay, so he or she does not have to cut their price. Now keep in mind, if everybody does it, theoretically, okay, then might the price go down? And the answer is sure. So when we graph total revenue, it looks something like this. Okay, now a quick note, and I'm going to put total costs on here. And if you recall from last week, my total costs looked something like this. Whoops. Okay, my total cost curve looked something like that. Now, theoretically, we could use the total cost curve. We're going to find it's not very useful, and so we're going to use a slightly different curve. And now a quick note here, okay, or a couple of quick notes. These are my fixed costs. Okay, and then the rest is above it is my variable cost. And now notice what happens. No, let's not use that color. Here, at this quantity, whatever quantity that is, okay, my total costs are greater than my total revenue. So I have in here a loss. I am losing money in there. Okay, I am losing money in there. At this point here, My total revenue and total costs are equal, so I am breaking even. That's my break-even point. Okay, notice I have another break-even point up here. And then everything in here is profits. Okay, and my biggest profit is going to be where that vertical line is the biggest. Okay, wherever that vertical line is the biggest, just eyeballing it there, it looks like it's there. So that would be then the amount of the quantity that I would choose to produce, and that would give me the most profit. I could do it this way. But from a economics perspective, excuse me, it doesn't give me a lot of information. One of the examples of information it doesn't give me is it doesn't give me at what point do you shut down? Okay, at what point do you close the doors? And keep in mind, I mean, it's not perfect competition, it's not pure competition, but think about what's happened to the restaurants over the last year. There were a number of restaurants that closed down. Okay, some of those closures were permanent. Some of them were temporary. Some of them kept their doors open and did carry out. Some of those kept their doors open and did delivery. What were they, you know, and so from our perspective as an economist, it's like, man, wouldn't it be nice to know how they made those decisions? And so what we're going to look for is kind of a better way than the total revenue, total cost. And I hate to tell you, but there is a way to do it with a lot more curves, but it'll tell us a whole bunch of information. So when we're looking at these graphs, we already graphed total revenue, okay? We can graph marginal revenue, and we can graph average revenue. Now, a quick note, I don't think it's on my next slide here. Well, yeah, I'm gonna go back a couple because I'm just gonna show you. Here's my marginal revenue. My average revenue, I could have calculated it. My average revenue, I'm going to have 131 divided by 1, so it's 131. I'm going to have 262, which is my total revenue, divided by 2, which is 131. I'd have, if I had 393, okay, I'd have 393 divided by 3, which is 131. So notice, in perfect competition or pure competition, my marginal revenue and my average revenue is exactly the same. So my marginal revenue and my average revenue are going to be are going to be exactly the same. My total revenue is going to go up. In fact, it's going to go up as a straight line, just as I had on that graph. But marginal revenue and average revenue are going to be the exact same, which means they're going to be perfectly horizontal at whatever the market price is. So this here, where they're perfectly horizontal, pardon me, is the market price. Okay, now, to be quite honest, average revenue, it's nice, your book has it in the tables, you know, your homework may ask you to calculate it, but it's not very useful. What's really useful is marginal revenue, okay? Marginal revenue is what's useful for us. So in perfect competition, for the firm, not for the industry, but for the firm, that particular farmer, the demand is equal to the marginal revenue and is equal to the average revenue, which also equals the price. So isn't this, from a farmer's perspective, a great world? We can sell all we want at the going market price, in this case, 131 bucks. So nobody's going to care if I go, and this is a term they use in farming, from fence post to fence post. Okay, if I plant every available acre and I get a little extra corn, am I going to have to cut my price to sell it? And the answer is no. Why? Because I'm just a small pea in this big ocean, okay? And because of that, I can sell all I want at whatever that market price is. In the example I'm using here, I think it's the same book example your textbook uses. It's 131 bucks. So now the questions the farmer has to answer, and just remember, a couple of moments ago, I said, the restaurant owner, keep in mind, the restaurant owner is not pure competition. Talk about it in 2 weeks. But the question the farmer has to answer, which is the same question those restaurants had to answer, is should we produce? And if so, if the answer to this question is yes, we should go ahead and plant our cornfield or our soybean field or whatever. The question is, what amount? Okay, I've got 1,000 acres. Should I plant 10, 100, or 1,000? Okay. And if I do that, the next question that's going to be is what's the profit, or is it profitable? Okay, so the question we need to answer is, should we produce? Answer is either yes or no. If the answer is yes, the question then is how much? Okay, keep in mind, a lot of farmers don't necessarily own their own land, but they lease it. So the question then is also kind of in there implied in this, how much should they lease? Okay, and how much money am I going to make? How profitable is it? Questions so far? So what we're going to look for, and keep in mind, this is for the individual producer, we are going to look for where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, we're going to look for where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So we can put in the market price. Keep in mind, that's determined over here with that supply and demand. We've got P up here, Q down here. Okay, and that's going to give us that market price, which then becomes the price. Okay, which is the marginal revenue curve, which is also the demand for my product. Notice up here, I try to charge a price up there. There's no demand for my product. Okay. Theoretically, could I charge a price down here? Yes. But, pardon my language, I'd be an idiot to sell it at a price down here when the market price is here. Okay. So what I have then is a demand curve that's also my marginal revenue curve that is perfectly horizontal at the market price. Now what I do is I add all my cost curves from last week. Okay, I'm going to add all my cost curves from last week. So I'm going to add the average variable cost. Okay, notice it's downward sloping, reaches a minimum and goes up, just like I drew it last week. I'm going to graph my average total cost. Okay, notice it's above it. It's got kind of the same shape. Keep in mind out here, as we're getting out here, it's going to get a little narrower, and over here it's going to be a little wider, which hopefully my graph illustrates. And then I'm going to graph the marginal cost curve. Okay. And remember what happens. The marginal cost curve is below the average variable cost curve and the average total cost curve. It cuts, as it starts to go up, it cuts it at its minimum. So this is the minimum. That's the minimum of the average variable cost. This point here is the minimum of the average total. That's my minimum. That's the minimum of my average total cost curve. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and graph these. Now, I don't think, let me just see. Yep. I didn't graph the average fixed cost. Okay. And keep in mind, the average fixed cost is on here. It's just not very helpful. Okay. So since it's not very helpful, it's not very useful, I have left it off. Okay, is it still on here? And the answer is yes. Okay, but I've left it off. What is going to happen is the firm is going to produce where marginal revenue and marginal costs are equal. Think about what this tells me. Marginal revenue is the revenue I get from producing one more. The marginal cost is the cost I get from producing one more. So that tells me, in this case, as an individual producer, as an individual farmer, that's how much output I want to produce. That is going to maximize my profit. Okay. And in fact, where that perfectly vertical line crosses the average total cost curve, that's going to tell me what my costs are and what my profits are. That's going to tell me where my costs are and what my profits are. And I will guarantee you that at any other Q, whether it's less than or greater than the Q that I have there, my profits will be smaller. There is no bigger profit that can be earned other than right there at that Q. Questions? So our profit maximizing rule is marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, this will always hold. I don't care if we're talking this week in pure competition. I don't care if we're talking next week in monopoly. I don't care if we're talking the week after that in monopolistic competition or an oligopoly. We're always looking for where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And so it applies to everybody. And it assumes that the firms choose to produce, okay, rather than shut down. The shutdown point is where marginal revenue, okay, as long as marginal revenue is greater than average variable cost, you produce. If marginal revenue is less than average variable cost, or if the price, keep in mind price, this is pure competition, price equals marginal revenue, okay? So if, you know, I've got here price, but I could have just as easily put marginal revenue. If marginal revenue is less than the minimum of the average variable cost curve, we shut down. And so now in perfect competition, price equals marginal revenue equals marginal cost, so price equals marginal cost. Okay. The beauty of pure competition, economists love pure competition. Why do economists love pure competition? Because price equals the marginal cost. So think about it. Price is what you pay. We're going to see this at the very last slide, or one of the last slides of class today. The marginal cost is the cost to produce at the margin. Okay, it's the cost for the farmer to produce the last bushel of corn or the last ear of corn. What did it cost him or her to produce that last ear of corn? If it cost them a quarter and you paid them a quarter, that means your price equals the marginal cost. That is, from an economic standpoint, very efficient. You are paying exactly what it costs them to produce that marginal unit. So now let's go back to my curves, go back to my graph, and notice I put down my shutdown price. So at any price below that red shutdown price, the firms don't produce. So at any price, any price down here, You produce 0. And the question is why do you want to produce 0? Because at that price, okay, quick note, we're below the average variable cost curve, not the average total cost curve. Okay. At that price, you're covering your variable costs and all you're losing is your fixed costs. At any price below that, at any price down here, you are not covering your average variable cost. So think about what's happening here. You have fixed costs, means the same, of $100, rent, what have you, okay? The average variable cost for you to produce, make it donuts, is 50 cents. When you consider the variable cost to produce the donut, the dough, the what have you that goes into it, it costs you 50 cents. If the price is only 45 cents, that means you lose a nickel plus your fixed costs. So if you produce one, you've lost $100.05. If you produce two, you've lost $100.10. Why would you choose to lose $100.10 when you can shut down and lose $100? So at any price below the average variable cost, you shut down. At 50 cents, if the price is 50 cents, I argue you flip a coin. You're at least covering your variable cost. All you're going to lose is your fixed cost. At any price above 50 cents, 51 cents. That penny goes to reduce your fixed cost. So you produce one unit. Over here, you lost $100.05. You produce one unit here, you lose $99.99 because you made a penny over your variable cost. If you choose to produce two, you lose only $99.98. Is it better to lose $99.99 or $100? It's better to lose $99.90 so you go to work. So at any price below the average variable cost curve, you shut down. And the way to think about this is why does this marginal revenue, marginal cost curve thing work? Assume the marginal revenue is $1. What that's telling me is that if I produce one additional unit, I'm going to get $1. If the marginal cost is 50 cents, do I produce? Yes. I generate $1, it costs me 50 cents, profit goes up by 50 cents. I make that unit. If the marginal cost goes up to 75 cents, do I produce? The answer is yes. I generate $1, I sell it for $1, costs me 75 cents, profits go up by $0.25. So as long as the marginal cost is below marginal revenue, I produce. What if marginal cost equals $1? Well, now I'm going to say yes. Might be a flip of the coin. Okay. I sell the unit for $1. It costs me $1. Did I make any additional profit? The answer is no. Now, might have I done it for market share purposes or something else? And the answer is yes. Okay. But suppose the marginal cost goes to $1.25. It generates $1 in revenue for me. It costs me $1.25 marginal cost. The cost to produce the last unit is $1.25. Nope. Why? Because now my profits go down by $0.25. I generate only $1 in revenue. It costs me $1.25 to make the marginal cost to make that unit. And keep in mind, marginal cost of the last unit, marginal revenue, the revenue from the last unit. Okay. So I don't produce that unit. So if the marginal cost goes up to $1.25, do I go there? And the answer is no. So the portion of the marginal cost curve that's lying above the average variable cost curve is the supply curve for the firm. Go back to chapter 3, folks. And you're going to see this also on the last slide of today's class. We drew the supply curve upward sloping. I never told you how we got it. Okay. The supply curve for the firm is the marginal cost curve above the average variable cost curve. That's the firm's short-run supply curve. So the supply curve for the firm looks very similar to what we drew back in chapter 3. An upward sloping curve. And note, if I'm a farmer and I have this supply curve, and you're a farmer and you have this supply curve, and the person next to you is another farmer and they have this supply curve, you add all those supply curves together, you get the market supply curve. Okay, so notice the supply curve for the firm is upward sloping. Okay, and it's the upward sloping portion of the marginal cost curve. Questions? Whoop, don't know how I did that. Now, a quick other note here, just as long as I have this graph up. As the price goes down, remember my profit maximization requires marginal revenue to equal marginal cost. Okay, as the price goes down, I supply less and less until I get down to there. And then at that price, I shut down. And notice if the price goes up, I try to supply more. Why? Because marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So the thing to realize is the marginal cost curve above the average variable cost curve is the firm's short-run supply curve. So at any price up there, I supply that amount. And at any price there, supply that amount. Let's go ahead. So at price 1, draw a straight line over to the marginal cost curve, drop down. As long as it's above the average variable cost curve, I produce. Okay. And now notice that there's my profits. Now at price point 2, I'm just going to point this out. Okay. It's a nice graph to do this on. Okay. I have a small loss. Okay. Why? Because my average total cost to produce that amount is there. Okay. Keep in mind, I drew that Q2 line straight up to where it hit the average total cost curve, and then drew the line over. So I have a small loss at P2. So I have big profits at P1. I have a small loss at P2, and anything below this price down here, I choose to shut down. So that's what's going on in the short run. Okay, that's what's going on in the short run. So in the short run, will firms have profits? And the answer is yes. Will firms have losses? And the answer is yes. When I started class today, I said economists love perfect or pure competition. And the reason we love that is because profits in the long run get competed away. So profits in the long run go away. Okay. Remember how I said my dad encouraged to get out of the business of farming? Why? His dad knew that, hey, you can have a great year. In the short run, can you make profits? Yep. In the long run, can you make profits? Yep. But in the long run, profits get competed away. Now, keep in mind, that doesn't mean that farmers earn no money in the long run. It just means that they earn a fair return on their investment. Okay? There's no outsized return, because all they're going to earn is a fair return on their effort and their investment, what have you. Now, that's not bad necessarily. Okay? But it's not an outsized profit. Okay? So what happens in the long run? In the short run, we assume that firms cannot, in the short run, firms can't enter or leave. Okay? And right now is a good example of the short run. Okay? You're going to look out at, if you're a farmer, you're going to look out at the market. And in fact, you probably did this in January, February. You're probably not doing it now. And you were looking at the time, how much corn and soybeans and what have you did they plant in Brazil and in Australia and in some of those southern hemisphere countries that we're having summer when we have winter. How much are they planting? How much did they produce? What's the going market price? What should I plant this coming spring? Okay. And in the short run right now, it's too late. Okay. If you find that the price is really high, you've already signed the lease for the land, or you already own the land, whatever. All you can do is choose to plant as many possible rows of corn on your land as you can. Okay. And the term they use in the farming community and whatever is they go from fence post to fence post. When the prices are really high, remember how I said high prices cure high prices back in chapter 3? When the prices for corn and soybeans and whatever are really high, you know the farmers are going to be looking at that price at this time of year and going, God, those prices are really high. We're going to get every row we can possibly get on our farmland. We're going to plant from what they call fence post to fence post. If the prices are really low, they're going to go, well, we're going to plant. Maybe not. Maybe they'd shut down. Okay. But, you know, we're not, you know, we've got some land that perhaps we'd like to leave fallow for a year or two to recover some of its nutrients, or maybe I've got a couple of acres that aren't quite as good, aren't quite as rich in nutrients, whatever. Maybe I just leave those out of production this year. Okay. So in the long run, firms can enter or leave the market. They can increase or decrease the size of their investment. They can buy more farmland. You know, maybe if you're in some of the third world countries, you can get some forest and cut down trees, okay, to make your farm even bigger. So now we've got to make a couple of assumptions here for what the farmer's going to do. The firms can enter and leave. We're going to assume they have identical costs. Okay, so we're going to assume all the farmers have the exact same cost. It just makes our analysis a little simpler. Okay, keep in mind, all firms are out there looking at that marginal revenue. They're all going to know what their marginal cost is, what their cost is to produce. And they're all going to individually make the decision where to produce. Okay, so we're going to assume that they have identical costs, and we're going to assume that those costs are constants. Look. We're also going to assume that profits attract entrants. We could also put the corollary to this: losses encourage you to leave. Okay, if you're going to lose money, you're going to get out. And we're going to assume that you have constant returns to scale. Okay, so there's not so it doesn't, by getting bigger, keep in mind from last week, what do constant returns to scale tell me? Constant returns to scale tell me that you're going to keep the same profitability if you get bigger. You're not going to be able to make more money. Questions on my assumptions? So let's take a look at what's going to happen here. On the left-hand side, I have my markets. On the right-hand side, I have my firm. Notice I've left off my average variable cost curve at this point. Only reason I did that is to make my graphs cleaner. Okay, the only reason I left it off is to make them cleaner. Keep in mind that I'm going to look for where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. I'm looking for where marginal revenue equals marginal cost because that's going to be profit maximizing. So I look for where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, which is right there. I drop down a vertical line where it crosses the average total cost curve. Those become my costs. And that up there becomes my profits. So this firm is making a ton of money. This farmer is making a ton of money. So is the firm generating a profit? The answer is yes. Will this cause firms to enter the market? If you saw that your farming friends were making a ton of money, you'd sit there and go, well, I can drive a tractor. I can buy some seed and throw it in the back of the planting machine. I can throw a little fertilizer on it a couple of times. I can watch it grow. I can harvest it in the fall. Heck yeah. So are more and more people going to come into this market and get in because they see those big profits? And the answer is yes. So our firm's going to enter the market? Yes. And so then the question becomes, what's going to be the impact on equilibrium price and quantity? Okay. So let's go back to my graph here. Sorry about that. Excuse me. Profit maximizing is right there. I'm making a ton of money. Profits attract entrants. Okay. Keep in mind, it's always very, interesting. If you follow this on a longer term basis, it's fascinating to see how American farmers follow what's going on and it's predominantly Brazil and Australia in the winter to know what the price is for corn and soybeans. Soybeans probably even the biggest one. Okay. And likewise, they follow what's happening now or will happen over the summer in what's their winter. Why? Because profits attract entrants. And a lot of these farmers, especially in the Midwest, they can plant corn or soybeans. Okay. Kind of another quick note, more farming than you probably care to know about. But corn takes, generally speaking, a longer growing season. Okay. So if you want to get corn in the ground, you've got to get it in earlier in the year. So if you find that the spring is really wet, okay, or very cold, you'll find the farmers can't get out in the fields, and so they'll plant soybeans. Okay. Why? Because soybeans take less time to plant. So they're looking at this stuff all the time. And most of the farmland in the Midwest is at least equally good at growing corn and soybeans. Okay. In fact, there's a lot of farmers that'll flip between the two because of nutrient requirements, what have you. Okay. So profits are going to attract entrants. So it's going to, they see a really high price. Yes, I can make a ton of money. Well, as they see that they can make a ton of money, now all of a sudden the supply curve is going to move out, because if I see it, nobody cares if just I plant more corn. But if one farmer plants more corn and you're a farmer and you plant more corn and the neighbor down the road plants more corn, pretty soon all that corn matters. Okay. And as all that corn matters, then the supply curve moves way out to the right. Keep in mind, I'm being a little bit overly dramatic here. Okay. So that supply curve would move out to the right. Notice what happens to the price. The price fell. Okay. Because the price fell, keep in mind, this is the long run. This is next year. Those profits disappear. Okay. We have a new output because we're looking for where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Now the industry is operating at a loss. When they're operating at a loss, let me go ahead and fill in the rest of this here. Their loss is going to be right there. So 1 year we went from a great profit. Bunch of entrants came in, pushed the supply curve out. As the supply curve went out, the price went down. Now they're losing money. Okay, now we do not know if the firm will shut down in the long run. Why? Because I left that average variable cost curve off. Remember, I left that average variable cost curve so I didn't have even more complications. They might have even shut down. The farmer might have even said, hey, I'll lose my taxes and what have you this year. I'm not going to produce. Okay. And in fact, it's also entirely possible the US government could come in and tell him to, produce, what shall we say, not produce any crops that year. So I don't know where the average variable cost curve is, so I don't know if they'll shut down. However, in the long run, the firms are not generating a normal profit. They're losing money. So what's going to happen since they're losing money is that firms are going to leave the market. And as firms leave the market, okay, eventually, remember before I was operating at a loss, at equilibrium in long run perfect competition, price equals marginal cost. It's going to equal right there at the minimum of the average total cost curve. That's going to be the Q I'm going to produce. And notice there are no economic profits. Now, this does not mean the farmer is not making money. The farmer is making money. The farmer is showing profits to the IRS, okay? But they're just making a normal return on their time and equipment and investment, what have you. So that's what will happen in the long run. So in the short run, can the farmers make profits? And the answer is yes. In the long run, can they make profits or losses? And the answer is yes. In the long run, however, what's going to happen is profits are going to be competed away, and we're going to end up at that equilibrium price there, okay, at whatever that amount is. I didn't put the dollar amount there, but that's where I'm going to end up when all is said and done. So now we can start to think about what happens with supply shocks and demand shocks. Okay. So notice what happens. Okay. Now, last year was a good example of a demand shock, specifically as respects corn. And it was not an increase in demand. It was a decrease in demand, though. And you go, well, why? Remember last year, about this time, we shut basically everything down. What that meant is the demand for gasoline went down. Corn is turned into ethanol, which is infused, mixed with whatever gasoline. Well, since we weren't buying as much gas because we weren't driving, guess what happened to the price of ethanol? It went down. What happened to the price of corn? Okay, it went down. Okay, what happened to the demand for corn? It went down because the firms that turn it into ethanol weren't turning it into ethanol. Okay, now in my example, I'm going to have the profits, the demand curve go up. So the demand goes up. Everybody wants corn. Okay, so what's going to happen to the equilibrium price? The equilibrium price is going to go up. When the equilibrium price goes up, the demand and marginal revenue curve go up. Notice once again, I'm just pointing this out so we've got the market here on the left, we've got the individual firm here on the right. So the demand for corn in this case went up. So the quantity that individual farmer is going to produce is going to go up. He sees, hey, there's an increase in demand. I'm going to go fence post to fence post. And now we're going to have profits. Okay, so what's going to happen is this year we're going to be profitable. Now what's going to happen? Some of those farmers that planted soybeans are going to go, I can plant corn and I can make more money. So next year or the year after or whatever, they're going to come and stop producing soybeans and come over here and produce corn. And as they do that, okay, the supply curve is going to increase. And as the supply curve starts to increase, what's going to happen to the price? The price is going to go down. And what's going to happen to those profits? They're going to get competed away. So the beauty of pure competition or perfect competition is that in the short run, firms earn profits and losses. In the long run, those profits and losses get competed away. Questions? One other quick note here, okay? And anybody want to hazard a guess what's going to happen, okay? If, and the government used to do this, I'd love to say, oh, we're a free market economy and we don't do any of this, what have you. But, and I really don't want I really don't want one with profits. Let me escape here. I want to go here. There we go. Suppose we have two markets. Okay, and I'm going to put corn up here, and I'm going to put soybeans down here. Put price and quantity, price and quantity. Okay, and yes, I have supply and demand curves, supply and demand curves. And let's go demand, or I can say price equals marginal revenue. Put P here, Q here. P here, Q here. I'll just call this demand equals marginal revenue. Okay. And let's make that my average total cost curve. Marginal cost curve. Notice I'm generating a loss. Okay. So up here in corn, I have a loss. Just going to put it over here so I don't mess up my graph too much. Okay. And over on the bottom graph, I'm going to have them showing a profit. That's my average total cost curve. Marginal revenue curve. And down here, I'm going to say there, let's put it green. They've got a profit. Now, notice something interesting that happens. Okay. And you know, people don't realize that everything is interconnected. So let's suppose these corn farmers have a great lobbying in DC. And they say, look, we can't make money at that market price. At that market price, we lose money. So we want the government to come in and pay us. Okay, and we want you to pay us not to produce. And I want to pay the corn guys $2 a bushel to not produce. Okay, why? Because they're losing money here. And, if they keep losing money, we're not going to have any corn, and those poor farmers are going to go out of business. So we're going to pay them $2. The question is, what does that do? Okay. Well, think about what that's going to do to all the other curves. Well, now we come over here, okay, and because you're paying them less, okay, this $2 a bushel not to produce, the supply curve is going to move to the left. The price is going to go up. Okay. And now they're going to be generating a lot of profits. And these guys down here are going to go, hey, corn is now a lot more profitable. Assume the curve's a little bit bigger. Okay. We're going to cut back production as well. Make even more money. And some of us are going to come up here and plant this, and keep in mind the supply curve will move back to the left a little bit. The bottom line is, if those corn farmers are good negotiators and can negotiate, $2 not to plant, even though it's only going to perhaps, I'm going to say, Iowa corn producers or whatever, all the farmers are going to benefit. I don't care if they're producing soybeans or something else. People don't often realize that goes on, but it does. Okay. And so it's an important thing to realize is we're looking at this. Hey, if there is somebody that is a great negotiator and can go to DC and get them to provide, put in there whatever you want, okay, it really benefits all the farmers, okay? Unless, of course, they're in such a market where their land, whatever, is not easily transferable. Corn and soybeans are easily transferable from one to the other. Others are not, okay? Believe it or not, the US grows rice in Arkansas, Texas, maybe a little bit of Mississippi, what have you. We grow rice. There's no way a farmer in Iowa can grow rice. So there is some land that's not easily movable from one to another. So what happens to our long run supply curve? And this gets back really to what we graphed back in chapter 3, okay? If costs are constant, the long run supply curve will be perfectly elastic. And I've got a graph, so we'll see what this all means without the words here in a minute. If we have increasing costs, which is most of the time the long run supply curve is as it's traditionally shaped, which is upward sloping, and decreasing cost curves are rare, okay? So if you think about how we drew, and I'm going to put it, how did I draw the supply curve back in chapter 3? I always just threw it up like that. If you remember how I drew the supply curve back in chapter 3, I always just drew it like that. Okay. And many times I didn't even necessarily care so much what it looked like. I just kind of threw it up. Okay. I just threw it up. How did I know the supply curve was upward sloping like that? Because I knew that most likely the long run average total cost curve looked like this, and that's where we're going to be. Okay. Now, is it theoretically possible that I could have constant returns to scale and my supply curve would be perfectly horizontal? And the answer is yes. Theoretically, it's possible. Is it very likely? And the answer is no. So why did we draw the supply curve upward sloping back in chapter 3? Because we knew that that's what our long run average total cost curve looked like. Most likely. Is there a chance I'm wrong? Yes. Is it very often I'm wrong? And the answer is no. Most of the time it's going to be upward sloping. And notice we never had a decreasing supply curve. I never even considered it because for the most part, we're never going to be operating on that increasing returns to scale portion. We're going to have either constant or decreasing returns to scale. Okay, quick note, just remember that's elastic. Okay, and in fact, it's perfectly elastic because it's perfectly horizontal. So that's the reason why throughout class, I've just kind of thrown the supply curve up like this. Why could I do that? Because I knew that it looked like that. Okay, I knew that it looked like that. Questions? Last item for the chapter, the reason why economists love perfect or pure competition is because it provides efficiency. Okay, and the first type of, and you're going to notice all the other models do not do this. First off, we have productive efficiency. The price, which equals the marginal revenue, is also at the minimum of the average total cost curve. What that means, folks, is when you buy that ear of corn, that is the least costly way they could have produced that ear of corn. And it means also, okay, that because of that, those economic profits got competed away. You're spending you have encouraged, I want to say forced, you've encouraged those farmers to produce very effectively. And so they're producing at the minimum of the cost to produce that amount of corn for you. And then the other efficiency is what we call allocative efficiency, where resources are apportioned among firms and industries to maximize consumer wants. The price equals the marginal cost. What that means is that the price you pay is exactly the cost that it costs them at the margin to produce that ear of corn. Okay, so you have attracted just the correct amount of resources to that industry to maximize the customer's wants. The bottom line is, from an economics perspective, okay, we love perfect or pure competition because it's productively efficient, it's allocatively efficient. We know that resources are being appropriately allocated to the industry. We also hate when the government steps in and starts doing government programs for farmers for whatever it might be, because we know that that means that these two ways of looking at efficiency are not going to hold anymore. So we love it because of its productive and its allocative efficiency. Questions? If not, let's talk next week. Next week. And I think I combined them. I don't recall specifically, but I think we do. There's going to be an assignment, and I'm going to put, there might be two. Okay. It's on pure, and I've already, or perfect competition. I think I might have made it all into one assignment, so you only have to click on one, but it might be on two. One's for the short run, one's for the long run if there's two, but I think I put it all together as one. Okay. You need to do the Learn Smart for the chapter on monopoly. Okay. And I believe I have a couple of articles, and I didn't do a great job. They're on monopoly. And There should be 1 or 2 articles, I believe, on monopoly that I posted. I know a couple of you have already read them, but they were really posted for monopoly. And I just, when I opened up this unit, I mistakenly let all my articles go at once. And so I've got a couple there on monopoly, at least 1, probably maybe 2. And then there's a discussion board. And the discussion board is very simple. Okay. And I want to just point out, it is not, to my knowledge, true. Okay. But the question that I have, the question I posed is, if Coke decided to buy Pepsi or Pepsi decided to buy Coke, would that be a monopoly? Okay, and I just posted the discussion board this morning, so it should be open, but that becomes the discussion board that we'll use as we're discussing monopoly next week. Hey, can Pepsi and Coke get together? Okay, can Pepsi and Coke get together and form, or would that be a monopoly? Any questions? Anybody?
Were you going to do a game today?
We were, but I didn't have enough folks, so I did not have one.